We teach molecular structure through a series of fractured, shifting rules that glitch the moment a molecule becomes complex. Modern chemical education relies on descriptive pluralism, a patchwork of disconnected theories that treat each new class of molecule as a separate pedagogical exception. In early lessons, orbital hybridization is used to explain the geometry of simple molecules, suggesting that the mixing of atomic orbitals is the primary engine of shape. When lone pairs appear, we must pivot to a completely different framework, VSEPR theory, to account for the resulting angular distortions. For aromatic rings, we often abandon both previous rules, relying instead on alternating Lewis resonance drawings to bridge the gap between theory and observation. Treating these concepts as isolated rules obscures the underlying physical reality. The molecule is a single, continuous structure governed by a unified grammar. Philip Lillian's 2026 monograph, Fourier Chemistry, replaces this pluralism with a single, integrated structural logic. The framework defines the molecule as an achieved regime of closure organization, prioritizing the stability of the whole over the simple aggregation of its parts. Standard textbooks follow a specific sequence. Atomic orbitals mix into hybrid orbitals, which physically dictate the molecule's geometry. Lillian reverses this order. Spatial geometry is the primary solution to a closure distribution problem. Hybridization is simply the mathematical label used to describe that regime. We can track this unified grammar across the canonical molecular sequence: methane, ammonia, water, ethene, and benzene. Understanding molecular architecture requires mapping exactly where and how structural closure is achieved, rather than merely assigning labels. The Level 1 foundation of this architecture establishes a new ontological baseline. Isolated atoms are structurally incomplete. These atoms possess partial closure modes that actively reach out for relational stability when brought under a shared molecular boundary condition. During closure adaptation, these atoms reorganize their available modes to minimize structural strain and maximize coherence as a single unit. This reorganization yields the first regime, primary scaffold closure, with methane serving as the paradigm case. Methane adopts a tetrahedral form because it is the unique, mathematically balanced spatial solution for a 4-channel distribution in 3 dimensions. In this regime, the physical bonded architecture represents the complete and successful realization of the molecule. The concentrated non-bonding closure regime, visible in ammonia and water, introduces a systematic modification to the scaffold. Here, the lone pair acts as a dense non-bonding closure concentration, a localized zone of structural influence. These localized concentrations do not extend into shared bond space, resulting in closure crowding. They occupy angular capacity more intensely than shared bonds. This crowding physically compresses the adjacent bonded channels, driving the angles down from the ideal 109.5 degrees to 107 in ammonia and 104.5 in water. VSEPR theory is revealed to be a localized manifestation of this density constraint, rather than a separate ad hoc rule. The third regime, localized residual closure, applies to unsaturated molecules like ethene and ethyne. When a primary scaffold contracts into planar or linear shapes, unabsorbed capacities remain available. These residual transverse modes, known as pi bonds, wrap around the primary scaffold as secondary stabilization layers. Adding these secondary layers increases total closure density, resulting in the shorter, more rigid connections characteristic of multiple bonds. Bond multiplicity represents the physical layering of closure stabilization in space. Extra lines on a Lewis diagram are simply symbolic shorthand for this increased density. This logic scales to the final regime, distributed cyclic closure, with benzene as the ultimate test case. Standard pedagogy relies on localized, edge-by-edge bookkeeping. However, alternating single and double bonds cannot capture the global reality of the ring. Aromaticity is defined structurally as the successful, unbroken global circulation of secondary closure around a compatible ring scaffold. This leads to the redefinition of resonance as projection insufficiency. It is a representational signal that a localized, two-dimensional drawing cannot contain a distributed topological reality. Benzene molecules exist as single, stable regimes. the traditional drawings suggest a rapid vibration or oscillation that does not exist in reality. The Lewis structure is merely a localized shadow. The actual ontology of an aromatic molecule is a single, globally distributed organization. Hybridization, VSEPR, and resonance are no longer separate, disconnected bins of chemical theory. They occupy a single continuous spectrum, moving from strictly localized, rigid scaffolds to globally distributed cyclic regimes. The level 2 layer reveals closure admissibility. Molecular geometry is the visible expression of atoms balancing the structural gains of angular balance against the physical penalties of crowding and strain. This culminates in the concept of grounded autonomy, the final philosophical result of the monograph. While the chemical world is physically dependent on its subatomic parts, its structural laws are irreducible. Chemistry is more than a shadow cast by physics. By viewing molecules as achieved regimes of closure, chemistry claims its own distinct reality, a domain where matter becomes structurally articulate.